What if the most disruptive force in technology today isn't a single breakthrough, but the combination of several at once? Today's guest is Professor Horst Treiblmaier, a full professor of international management at Modul University of Vienna and a research fellow at the UCL Centre for Blockchain Technologies, the Digital Euro Association, and the DLT Education Consortium. He has been researching blockchain since 2015 and is now focused on how it intersects with AI and broader economic transformation. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Nasib, for having me.
So, what first got you interested in blockchain research back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I started doing research in 2015. Of course, I have heard about Bitcoin long before because I did my PhD in e-commerce and I was aware of the work that was going on in electronic payments, or the work of David Chaum or Wydai. And around 2015, there were a couple of triggers. First of all, a student of mine was asking me to include Bitcoin in my e-marketing class. And then I was also a member of a think tank for logistics and supply chain management at the European Union. And in there we discussed, or it was discussed, that blockchain might be interesting for logistics. So I asked myself, what is this Bitcoin blockchain thing all about? Because it got confusing to me. The moment you get into it, you learn about governance and so on. And initially I thought it's just really a peer-to-peer e-cash system like was described in the white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto. And initially I thought, well, I can save maybe 3% cost for intermediaries. But then I thought, now I need to explore the whole thing way more. And so in 2015, I decided to get into it and to first learn how Bitcoin works, what Bitcoin is. And then, of course, it expanded and I got into blockchain technology and I became more and more interested in what you can do with it on an economic, on a business level, on a societal level.
As someone recognized among Austria's top social scientists, what perspective does that bring when you think about technology?
Yeah, so I studied business administration, but I always had an interest in technology. And a couple of years ago, I even authored a paper saying that business students need to learn about technology because nowadays technology is the most disruptive driver for all kinds of businesses and economies. And so I always had a close eye on what was going on in the technology field. And this helps me to understand the driving forces and to better understand what is needed for companies to stay competitive. And right now I see a couple of very important drivers. Of course, my background is mostly in blockchain technology, and I still think that's highly important, how distributed ledgers can contribute to a more efficient and effective economy and businesses. Of course, the elephant in the room is AI, artificial intelligence. Everybody's talking about it. But I also think what's very important is robotics, especially when it comes to manufacturing. And the fourth field would be the Internet of Things to connect all these kind of technologies. Of course, there are other things going on in genetic engineering and so, but those four technologies are the ones that are most important from my perspective and that are most interesting to me.
You often refer to chaordic economics. What does that mean?
Okay, I need to give you the background story.
Yeah.
In 2015, Melanie Swan was the first one who published a book on blockchain economics. So she was very early in the space, and I edited a couple of books. 2-3 years later, I invited her to publish in my books, and then she invited me to publish in her books. And last year she wrote me an email, there's a new edition, there's a new book coming out, if I would like to contribute a chapter on theory. And Melanie is extremely creative, and I know that's an opportunity for me to come up with some new ideas. And I thought, what kind of theory can I create that involves blockchain and AI? And at the same time, it was really a coincidence. I was reading the book from Dee Hock. Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, who wrote a book, One for Many. It was about the story how Visa came into existence. And it was Dee Hock who coined the term chaotic organization. Chaotic is a mix of chaos and order. So I was reading the book and I was constantly thinking, what can I contribute to the book from Melanie? And then I was going back to my bed, and on the nightstand there's the book from D. Hawk, Chaordic, and suddenly it occurred to me, what about if I would think about artificial intelligence and blockchain as drivers of chaos and order? And my first idea was, blockchain, that's a deterministic system. Everything has to be in sync, and you have smart contracts. It has to be very clear how something is being executed. Blockchain is a driver for order, deterministic. And artificial intelligence is way more unpredictable, so that could be a driver for chaos. That was my starting point. But then I gave it more thought, and I analyzed it from different angles. What happens to information flow from an AI perspective, from a blockchain perspective? What happens to information processing, and so on? And then I figured out both artificial intelligence and blockchain are drivers for chaos, which is unpredictability, which doesn't have to be negative, I have to say. Chaos for us sounds negative, but it could also be some kind of creative space, and at the same time order. And I summarized my ideas in a paper, and I hope you can share it in the link under your podcast.
I will surely do that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So people can look at it, and it's a kind of a blueprint for a new way of thinking, hopefully. That's my intention.
I think it can be a game changer in a lot of discourse in various fields, actually. Why should people in academia and especially industry pay more attention to this concept?
Because it's very comprehensive. You know, it might scare off some people from the industry because the paper says a theory of chaotic economics. And again, I took the term chaotic from D. Hawk. I included the economics part. So it should be very integrative, it should be wholesome. And if you go and buy the book from D. Hawk, you will see he was a practitioner. The book is very philosophical, but he's reporting on his own experience how to create an organization such as Visa, which is covering the world at a time when those institutions were competing against each other, but he needed to find a way to make them also cooperate with each other. And that's why he came up with some kind of organizational structure in which organizations can stay independent but also work together. And I had the same idea from a business perspective, and practitioners can use my framework, hopefully, to look at many different angles that blockchain and artificial intelligence can provide to the company. So it could be further developed into frameworks that could be used to analyze business models, for example, that could be used to evaluate how businesses are doing at the moment. At the same time, I hope that academics get interested in diving deeper, improving on my concept, pointing out some flaws, adding things that I forgot, and make it more actionable. So that would be my vision for this concept. And again, in a nutshell, I think it's very comprehensive, and so hopefully it can be used as an assessment scheme for companies, for their business models, and at the same time for academics to better understand how those disruptive technologies impact our society and the economy.
How does chaotic thinking help us prepare for economic transformation, actually?
My hope is that people should keep in mind always different perspectives. Mm-hmm. It's very rarely the case that something is only black and white, but we tend to have this kind of black and white thinking. It's either A or B. And we are all living in our own bubbles. For example, I know on the internet I'm getting pointed towards new information, towards videos based on what my previous interests are. So we're living in our bubbles, and companies might think, for example, blockchain is this, it cannot help me, or it's a silver bullet, and the same with AI. My intention is to show people different ways to look at things, the positive aspects and the negative aspects, and hopefully to be more realistic. So they have some kind of blueprint, some kind of framework that gives you opportunities to look at a problem from different angles and figure out, in this way, one technology could help me, but at the same time there might be negative side effects. And that's my intention.
That reminded me of a few posts on LinkedIn that I saw how one of the professionals, he has been saving millions, tens of millions of dollars for companies who wanted to process this AI transformation, but then as a matter of fact, they just needed to rearrange their databases and automate them without integrating AI on a full scale or reshaping the whole organization. So that's I think it's something which something that resonates, I guess.
It's an excellent point, because in many organizations we have an issue that they are not effective. It's not so much about efficiency, making the processes more streamlined, but rethinking whether we need those processes. And of course, there was a concept of business process re-engineering that originated a couple of decades ago. I was documenting a blockchain case about 10, 15 years ago in Italy. And the CTO who was in charge told me first they wanted to use the distributed ledger to make the process they already had in place more efficient, but then they figured out now it's an opportunity to completely rethink what they're doing. So they re-engineered the process before putting it into an electronic format. And that's exactly what you said. Many companies most likely do not AI to make what they're doing more efficient, but they need to rethink if what they're doing is effective in the first place.
Exactly. And in what ways AI is already shaping the way economies and societies work?
You know, when we're talking nowadays about AI, most people think about these large language models. And AI has been around for much longer. It depends on how you define it. I mean, the Dartmouth conference was in 1956, if I'm correct. And even before that, all those statistical procedures that are included, for example, in machine learning, which is part of AI, have been developed decades ago. For example, when I talk about logistic regression in my classes, students are not getting that enthusiastic at telling about sigmoid functions, but this is basically machine learning. It's part of AI figuring out what kind of categories something belongs into. So AI has been around for a while. 15 years ago, I got a call from my credit card company. They informed me that there was something going on with my credit card, and I could figure out that somebody was misusing it. So that was AI. It was a pattern matching. And for me, that has a huge impact because somebody wanted to steal my money. So, but of course, nowadays, AI is associated with large language models because they're so easy to use, so intuitive, and they're completely transforming the way we're doing business already. I know consultants who are showing companies how to automate many processes. 2 weeks ago, I talked to somebody who is showing employees in a company how they can automate their emails. So AI is basically answering for them, AI is scheduling appointments, those kind of things. So we're getting more efficient in that kind of
AI agents, basically.
AI agents, yes.
At times with each other as well.
Yes, could be agent, but you can easily implement some kind of application in your email software. I tried this out for myself, and it's automatically answering your emails depending on the settings you're providing. So yeah.
Through voice message to Telegram bot, which creates it, for instance, right?
Exactly.
It's a very, very, very interesting topic. So what role does blockchain play in that shift?
Yeah, it's a completely different technology, and for me it's always interesting to see how those hype cycles work. You know, I give you an episode that was 20 years ago when they had those Blue Mondays, I think they called them, when inventors and business people and people with money, they met, and I overheard a conversation at those times, somebody saying, Java, the programming language, is not going to stay here for long because XML is not going to stay long because Java is coming in. XML and Java are completely different languages. Java is a programming language, XML is a highly sophisticated formatting language, and for me it's something similar right now. People are comparing apples and oranges. They're saying, the blockchain hype is over, now we have AI. Those are different technologies, and you can only get the full power out of them if you combine them. And I can even see this at universities. So universities are saying, now we are teaching AI, not blockchain anymore, but it's apples and oranges, really.
And so then when these two technologies converge, what becomes possible that wasn't before? And what should be recognized, not only possibly by universities, by but by big companies and enterprises as well.
Yeah, I would like to give you one example that I just had a couple of days ago. Google apparently was making an online booking. So if you have a travel agent working for you and you want to go on vacation, then you can tell the AI, please book something for me. And AI can do this. It can search the best offers. AI knows what kind of preferences you have, meaning AI system can find your ideal destination. But of course, what AI cannot do, it cannot make the payments for you, not independently. So there you need, let's say, some kind of cryptocurrency, ideally if it's peer-to-peer on a blockchain, and preferably also some kind of digital identity system, so that the AI can identify itself, or it makes it clear that it's acting on your behalf. So if you put these technologies together, then you have the full process. Some kind of system can identify itself, it can make the payments, and of course it can find the best offers for you. So put them together, then you have a great support system.
How are universities preparing students for this convergence of tech? So coming back to that topic.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not easy, I have to say, because first of all, you need to find people who are willing to constantly update their field of teaching, and you need to do this in these areas, in AI, of course, in blockchain, in every kind of technology field. You cannot keep the same PowerPoint slides that you had 15 years ago. And there's also some kind of outside pressure, so to speak, because each and every study program needs to be accredited. And if you want to make any kind of major changes, then you need to ask the accreditation committee. So universities usually are not that fast reacting to those trends, because they also need to check out if it's not really a hype topic that's gone in a semester or so. But I think, of course, many universities are aware of this situation, and hopefully they're integrating this into their programs.
Are you seeing real collaboration between academia and industry to explore these possibilities?
Yes, this has always been the case, especially in topics that are very close in the industry. I've seen, of course, business plan competitions. I was on the board of a couple of these competitions. I'm always reaching out to the industry, and especially in fields that are very applied, and business is an applied field. It's absolutely crucial that universities listen to the business needs, that we talk to the managers to figure out what kind of qualifications they need right now, they might need in the future. But we also, on top of that, we also have to think about what can potentially come and adjust our teaching programs respectively.
What's still missing in how we teach or think about AI and blockchain?
It depends, of course, on the university, because when blockchain came up, I've seen many universities establishing dedicated programs. So I think one of the top-notch universities in the field was from Cyprus, because they figured out we might need the technology because it's related to payments, that's important for us, and they're still one of the leading universities in the field, and others were following suit. Some of those programs didn't make it, but others have established themselves in niches, which is kind of good and interesting.
What was it? University of Nicosia?
University of Nicosia. I think they were the first ones to get the programs accredited.
And it was a specific dedicated master program, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they have more programs now. They're constantly extending.
I also heard about programs in Frankfurt University.
Yes, they are specialized on finance. So they have their own niche, and it's a good thing, because there's a lot coming up now with crypto assets, and there's the MiCA regulation at the European Union, and they're doing a great job constantly finding new topics that they can explore, and at the same time closely working together with practitioners.
Interesting. Do you think that the future, a bit off topic, but do you think that the future of universities is online? And how will universities adapt, because there are such technologies as blockchain and AI, they are spreading everywhere and it's inevitable. So how should universities adapt? So getting online, and maybe some certain structural shifts should happen, right?
some universities are doing that, and if you would have asked me that question 10, 15 years ago, most likely I would have said yes, because it's not only blockchain, AI, those topics, but I think the big game changer were also MOOCs, massive online, open online courses, because how many excellent courses do you need in one subject? Basically, one would be enough if you can watch it online, but thank goodness universities still survived, because what I think is crucial is the personal interaction with the students. I would like to do this offline, that's my first choice. But even if you do it online, you have these live sessions that we also had during COVID, so you can react to the students. And of course, there are hybrid models, and some universities are offering pre-recorded formats. So all of those currently exist in parallel. My personal hope is that we don't give up offline teaching, because that's the most personal and interactive manner.
Personally, I would vote for a hybrid mode and for the opportunity to choose, because I remember the COVID times. It was hard to perform a transition in a way to the online mode fully, but at some point I realized that it's very useful. It's practical, at least for me, because I can simply do more if I'm connecting online. And those people who are actually dedicated and really want to and commit to their studies and to their future, they will anyway sit and put an extra work, effort, and they will study.
Yeah, we are also offering hybrid courses, but I have to say, from a teaching perspective, it's the least wanted, because you never know what's going on online, and it's always a little bit difficult to entertain offline students and at the same time making sure you don't lose the online students. But it's definitely an option, and nowadays with technology you can offer a hybrid mode and somebody can watch you from a different continent.
So, do you see a future where some of your colleagues are replaced by robots? Because I know for a fact that it has been happening for quite some time. People or universities have been experimenting that, and those were top universities. What do you think about it?
Right at the moment, I don't think that any job is safe. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was on a panel, and one of the panel participants mentioned, if nowadays you want to have a safe job, you need to be an electrician, because then you could open a wall and wire the cords, because on those jobs, those white-collar jobs, we thought are going to be safe, including university professors. They're not safe any longer. But let's look at the history. Over time, more and more working jobs have been replaced. People are no longer working in the fields. Then we had assembly line workers. Machine can now do that. And of course, with the AI revolution, we now have the potential to replace white-collar workers. Just yesterday, a colleague of mine told me that he is working on an AI system that helps legal immigrants in Italy. The URL is, I think, benvenuto.ai. So that can maybe not fully replace a lawyer, but it can make the work for lawyers much easier or much shorter. And coming back to the electrician, I'm not sure if in the medium term it wouldn't be possible to have robots which are doing the job, which are at least supporting humans with electricity or even garbage collection. If you can
Plumbing as well.
If you have garbage disposal units at dedicated places, then you have self-driving cars, then you have maybe a human that uses an exoskeleton. So you can downsize in all kinds of fields. And coming back to those white-collar workers, 10 years ago, I would have thought, university professor, you cannot replace them. But now you're saying, yes, we have the knowledge using AI, and if you need something humans can relate to, which would be a robot that looks like a humanoid, then it might be the future. I don't hope it's the case, but in summary, I don't think any job is safe at the moment.
Coming back to blockchain and AI, what's something people rarely understand about these technologies, how these technologies interact?
Yeah, about the interaction, I think I already gave the example about booking something. Another example would be self-driving cars, which are very popular in the media, and everybody can understand what they're doing. They're just cars that drives for themselves, they need to use AI because they need to make decisions. They need to decide based on incoming information from the world where to go. But you can also integrate blockchain. You can make them into profit centers, and that would mean that they become independent units. They can have their own, if you like, invoicing. They can do their own payment system. So another example. And what people don't understand is very often the basic functionality. In the case of blockchain, it's kind of obvious because for many years blockchain was purposefully associated with Bitcoin, which was associated with energy consumption. So the term blockchain very often still has a negative connotation. And very few people fully understand, I don't need to say fully, I mean understand the basics, how blockchain work, how it is possible to reach consensus among peers without any intermediaries, even though that basic stuff people don't understand. With AI, it's more or less the same. It's kind of hard to understand for people how the things behind the scenes work. How is it possible if you make some kind of entry in a simple user interface that it spits out all this information? And the question is how deep we need to go, how much people would need to understand. You know, I'm not a computer scientist, a mathematician myself. I didn't develop any of these algorithms, but I took a little bit of a deep dive, but not deep enough. But at least I claim that I have a basic understanding of how these systems operate.
Has your research ever led you to rethink a belief you held about blockchain or AI?
All the time, because when you're doing research, you're learning new facts, new information about technologies. And as I've mentioned before, blockchain and AI, they're not static. They're being further developed, and they're also not kind of neutral technologies. In a way, they create a lot of emotions. There's a lot of debate. Some people have very negative feelings toward blockchain, the Bitcoin energy, and the same with AI. That means the more I learn about technologies, the more I learn about different use cases. This, of course, shapes my attitude and also changes my attitude. I think it's quite natural.
Mm-hmm. And if you could rewrite one regulation or educational policy around these technologies, what would it be?
Let's start with blockchain. In blockchain, we now have in Europe, especially MiCA, market in crypto assets. And I think on the one hand side, that's a great step forward that we have regulation. On the other hand, you might argue it might go a little bit too far. If we would like to rewrite regulation, we also would need to rewrite a little bit of history. What should we have done earlier? What should we have done in order to compete with other nation states that are a little bit ahead of us? And this is something only history will tell us. If I had to make some kind of recommendation, maybe I would have been a little bit more lenient, but personally I feel that it's good that we have regulation. There are different aspects that need to be regulated. MiCA is just one example. Of course, we have other regulations that play into the field. And when it comes to AI, of course, that's even more tricky, I would say, because it can potentially affect so many aspects of human life. And in this regard, I cannot say much because we have to see how it all works out, what kind of AI systems come up with, what kind of capabilities, how will that impact human lives, how will it impact topics such as privacy, and then we have to see how good our current regulations are. And of course, as you know, Europe is always a little bit ahead or advanced or more stringent when it comes to regulation, and only time will tell us if that's the right approach.
For some people, regulation and compliance is a tool for scaling. Some people perceive it this way, especially compliance officers and professionals and experts. Some people who are building companies, for sure, they see it as both a constraint at times, but at the same time as an opportunity too, because they think that, yeah, probably this will set a standard, or at least we will test it here in Europe, and then the whole world will follow, at least partially, and will adjust in a way. But that's also just a theory, right, or hypothesis that's not really proven yet. So let's see how it unravels. So, looking to the future, what excites you most about where AI and blockchain are heading?
AI, blockchain, and I would also include other fields. I've mentioned the fields before, like genetics, where I'm not proficient, but I would also see Internet of Things and robotics. And if you put them all together, you can really say it's exciting, but you can also say it's exciting in a good ways, because many things that are happening now, that's something I would not have expected it to happen during my lifetime. And we are currently in a transition phase. The world will look very differently in 10 or 20 years. And excite also in a negative way, meaning there could be also many negative side effects. And we currently see how all these technologies are also used, for example, warfare and things like that, which is not good. So they can be problem solvers, but they can also create new problems. It's an exciting time to live in. It's an interesting time to live in. And we all need to work together to get the best out of that.
Just recently, OpenAI has signed a contract with US military. The size of the contract was around $200 million, and yeah, people are there are mixed feelings about it when it comes to the sentiment. Some people are getting a bit more extreme and think that this is how the end begins. But I think that staying a bit practical and at the same time see what it actually leads to is also important, right? To stay flexible, but very careful.
Yeah, Pandora's box has been opened in many ways, and this you can go back in history and talk about nuclear energy, which was soon after used for the atomic bomb, and then for nuclear power stations. People said there will never be any incidents. I think the first one was in Canada. We had 3 Mile Island, and then was Chernobyl. So you cannot undo the technology. And even if you would limit it or forbid it in some countries, talking about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, or talking about AI, we're living in one world, we're living on one planet. In other places, it will be further developed. You cannot undo this. And so we have, and I mean humankind and national states, we have to think together how we can use it for the best possible purposes. And that's a tricky part.
I think that people are too focused on AI, and they're literally sleeping on robotics and what has been developed for years already, and the way robotics is being implemented in military as well, in combat focused or oriented robots are something that most people would be surprised of, because they can do wonders in combat, and I think staying responsible with these technologies is important, but at the same time, focusing on just one topic isn't really good. You need to develop a more well-rounded understanding of what's actually going on. Right?
You absolutely need to be aware of all these things and how they play together, because there's so many synergies. I know researchers at TU, I think in Munich, they just used AI to have a remote control for drones. So the AI system came up with a choreography for drones. And of course, in manufacturing, robots are a big topic. But if you mix all up these technologies that I've mentioned before, you're getting much more out of them than just looking at them individually. I personally do not do any research in how you can use these technologies for warfare, for military purposes, because that's also a little bit frustrating, because everything that's being useful for warfare will also be used, unfortunately. And so I have my research interest how you can use these technologies, hopefully to improve businesses, but also society.
What's also interesting is seeing two robots exchanging ideas with each other, selling things to each other, and buying them whilst using, for instance, cryptocurrencies such as stable coins, right, and signing the contracts and so on, while working for a corporation, for instance.
A researcher from Harvard University, Primavera de Filippi, a couple of years ago has done an experimental study. She created some kind of physical systems they called plantoids. They're looking like plants made of steel, and they were connected to a blockchain. They were using a smart contract to pay humans to create more of them. So a machine, a physical thing, was ordering something from a human being. And when I'm telling this story to my students, some of them are shocked. They're saying, that's kind of weird. That's not how the future should look like. But if you think of self-driving cars that I mentioned before, if you make them an independent unit, they are driving and they are cost centers, so they are doing business on themselves. It's the same idea. And the self-driving cars, they also need to order humans for repair purposes, for example. It's the same idea, and this idea seems more logical and people get not shocked that much. And I think something like that makes sense, but we have to be very careful not to reach a tipping point, when robots are not being controlled anymore and humans are doing the work for them. That would be weird, but it's possible, I think.
I think it's possible. Everything is actually possible. Also, blockchain technology could be used in these cases to record data, right? What has been done, and then the good question to ask would be who will be responsible for whatever happens. Is that the robot would personally have a digital identity and digital passport one day, or it's a corporation or an owner, and so on and so forth. But that's something for the later time, I guess. We don't know it now. For young researchers or students entering this space, and by this space I mean AI and blockchain, maybe the convergence of the two, what mindset should they bring?
The easy answer would be an open mindset, of course, because chances are those things that you need in 5 years from now, some of those things have not been developed yet. You need to have a very open mindset, and you need to be willing to constantly learn new things. And I would also recommend that any student right now getting into space, having an eye on the industry to see what they need, what they might need in the future. And on top of that, I recommend to learn the basics, even if it's not clear if you need them. For example, you can say, I'm not learning the program now because AI is getting much better than that. And with those new models coming out, they can produce nice source code. I do not want to be a software engineer, so I stay away from learning, let's say, Python or R because the code is being produced for me. I think that's the wrong attitude. You should be willing to learn something such as a programming language, even if you can use AI later to produce you the code, but you should understand how it works. So it's like being able to drive a car or being able to repair a car. And for students, they should be able to repair a car. They do not need to become professional engineers, but they should be able to open the hood and understand how the parts work together in programming, so to speak.
Extended wipe coding, so to say.
In a way, yes. And even if you see it more like a hobby, you have 85 billion brain cells. That was an estimate recently, and you somehow need to keep them busy. And my recommendation would be find something that is challenging for you and that keeps you busy, even if you're not 100% sure if you can apply it later on. Don't only rely on those tools, try to understand how they work under the hood.
For business leaders, what do they often miss when thinking about AI and blockchain?
Let me start with blockchain, which is kind of fascinating because beginning I told you it was about 2015 that I heard about blockchain in context of logistics. And just 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, let's say 2025, I was giving a presentation to a company that's into logistics. It's a transportation company, and they did not really know what blockchain was all about. That was fascinating for me that in the industry there was so little awareness. When it comes to blockchain, business leaders, first of all, should understand what the technology can do for them beyond the hype. They do not need to understand all these technical details, but it's always the emerging properties that are important. For example, with blockchain, what can you do if you have data that's immutable? Is this important for you or not? What can you do if you have shared data access, which is important in logistics? Those are the properties that business leaders should understand, and based on those properties they can then build their models. And it's basically the same with AI. They should go beyond the hype, look at the properties and look what the emerging features are, and then go back to the company and see how they can implement it in a useful manner. And coming back to what we discussed before, first of all, they would need to reanalyze the existing processes and maybe streamline the operations anyway, and then find the pain points where those technologies can actually contribute. It's always the same story. It's nothing new, basically.
This has been a deep dive into what happens when powerful technologies intersect and why understanding the convergence is key to understanding what comes next. If someone wants to follow your work or dive deeper into your research, where should they start?
First of all, it's always easy to find me. You know, my name is kind of unique, and if somebody's interested in my research, my papers are usually published on ResearchGate, most of them. If something is not available, they can always reach out to me and send me an email. I would be happy to share my research. And again, if there are any questions that are more detailed, then I would be happy to answer them in person. I'm also regularly giving talks at conferences, some of them online, and I would be happy to meet the audience and especially get into an exchange with practitioners that have problems that they need to solve, because that's always for me some kind of check if what I'm doing is really relevant, if I meet with managers from the industry and see if the solutions that I can envision provide some value.
Also, people can connect with you on LinkedIn, I guess?
Yes, well? Definitely. LinkedIn, ResearchGate, academia.edu. I'm easy to find.
Professor Treiblmaier, thank you for sharing your thoughts on where the economy, technology, and society might be heading.
Thank you, Rasip.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
And to everyone listening or watching, if this gives you a new way to think about the technological future, like, subscribe or follow, and share it with someone curious.